Welcome to NAIS Member Voices. I'm Scott Donaldson, Member Engagement Director at the National Association of Independent Schools. Before we begin, I'd like to thank this episode's sponsor, DSG Storbeck. DSG Storbeck, the education practice at DSG Global, is proud to sponsor this podcast on head of school transition. Their K-12 schools team is uniquely positioned to address the needs and trends that demand bold, nimble leadership. They have 5 decades of deep experience in advising schools on leadership searches and transitions and providing coaching on successful onboarding. Visit dsgco.com to learn more. This month, we're talking with Dr. Todd Herauf, head of school at the Galloway School in Friendswood, Texas. Todd, welcome to Member Voices.
Thank you, Scott. I have been looking forward to this for a while, and I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for saying that. Likewise. So let's talk leadership. I wanted to start with a broad, sweeping, maybe overwhelming question, but the word leadership, what does that mean to you?
Well, I would say it's changed over time. When I was first a teacher I started in the 90s. I would have confused leadership with management and just it was the person who was in charge. And then as I began my teaching career and started to work for different administrators, I saw how some were truly good at managing an operation and doing the day to day, but others you felt compelled to follow, and not just because it was your job, but there was something about the person or organization that made you feel a certain way. And I originally didn't start out wanting to be an administrator. Since third grade, wanted to be a teacher. That's what I went to school for. I became a teacher. And it wasn't until after having a few different principals in public school that I started to think, you know what? This might be something for me to do. And I would say around that time is when I would have said, okay, so management is really just making sure things happen, however you can do that. Whereas leadership is empowering others to make things happen, or want to be a part of something greater and then do things in that organization. And it's about that time that I decided that if I got into graduate school, I would sort of say that's my sign, and I would take on that role. And my first professor was a principal at the time in a school district in North Texas. And all of our textbooks were either leadership textbooks, some education, some not, or things like the book, If You Don't Feed the Teachers, They'll Eat the Students. And that's where then sort of in my own mind, I realized that relationships are as much a part of any definition of leadership. And I began sort of changing my thoughts as I went through graduate school and ultimately got my doctorate, both master's and doctorate in ed leadership.
Can you talk a little bit more about your leadership style? I feel like I'm getting a sense already, but how would you describe it? What do you feel like your communication style is, and how has it changed over time?
So I've always been a really good communicator. Where that first showed up was I was often asked to lead trainings and have discussions with people. And as I've grown in my leadership, though, I would say the communication has most changed, and I am now not scared to be transparent. I feel like I'd rather be transparent from the beginning and let people know where they stand and let them make the decision. Okay, is this a person? Is this the decision I can follow because all the cards are out on the table, rather than being more guarded and maybe knowing things that are impacting my decision making and others need to hear about. So I would say that from a communication piece, there's that. Something that I've always believed, and I don't know where I learned it initially, but was the power of relationships. And if I was interviewing for a job, almost every answer had something to do with relationships because I believe it's that strong. And so as my journey has changed as a leader, relationships have always been a part of it. Open, transparent communication has been a part of it. But it wasn't until about 3 or 4 years ago that I was introduced to Phil Boyd, and he calls it people first leadership. And to me, I've sort of latched onto that, where it really is about the people first in everything that we try to do here. And what I've tried with my administrators to instill is that we need to take care of the people, students, parents, teachers, community. We need to do that first, and then we will get to all of the business we need to get to. But in my year and a half, almost two school years now, I would say that's probably been the most talked about thing in my leadership, is that we are becoming a people first school.
Yes, love that. And you transitioned from being an associate head of school previously to this new role as head, and this is your first headship. Is that right?
It is. It is. So, to be honest, up until 2015, I felt my career trajectory was assistant principal, principal, assistant superintendent, superintendent, and then as I approached retirement, it was going to be an adjunct professor. Like I felt like it was all laid out. And then in 2015, I had helped open a public school in Capel ISD. And in our first 2 years, we toured over 5,000 people through this public school, and River Oaks Baptist School was one of the people we toured, one of the groups. I still remember that morning, my boss and I sort of arguing over who was going to give the tour because neither of us had any interest in private schools and didn't want to waste an hour of our important day. But because she was my boss, I had to do it. And so I gave the tour, and they were touring because our school, it was a net zero school for one. We produced more electricity than we consumed. We had writable surfaces all over. We had open classrooms. I mean, every bell and whistle you could just about want, we had. And River Oaks Baptist School was working on a very large campaign to do something similar. So I didn't know this, but I gave them the tour, and we finished the tour. And the head of school popped back in and said, "Hey, I love what you were talking about. You didn't know this, but we're trying to do something similar. Would love to have you down to Houston." And I said, "Well, my wife has said anywhere but Houston, so no thanks." Well, they were persistent, finally brought me down for a day, and eventually brought my family down to tour the school. And my wife, after the tour, I remember her holding my hand and saying, "This is an amazing place. I think I'll put up with the traffic and the weather and we'll figure it out." And so in 2016, I became the associate head of school for academics at River Oaks Baptist School. And I had been doing that then for about 5 years. And my boss agreed that it was probably time for me to have my own school. She was a champion, Leanne Reynolds, the head of school over at River Oaks Baptist. And I was a finalist in like 4 or 5 searches in the Houston area, and every single one, I got the same phone call. "We loved your answers. We loved your enthusiasm. We know you're gonna make a great head of school, but we're gonna hire someone with head of school experience." And I was sort of hitting my head against a wall thinking, you gotta get experience to have experience, all that. And my boss at the time said, "You've applied for some of the bigger schools in Houston. Maybe you need to broaden your search a bit." And the Houston area was still my limitation for various reasons. And this job opened, and it was looking for an interim head for 1 year. And it was in Friendswood, which is 47 miles from where I live. And so I reached out and said, "Look, it looks like you've got something going on there, but I have one kid going to college, one kid in high school, one kid in elementary school. I can't take an interim role." I said, "But if you will allow me through the process and for the board to know that I'm only accepting a full-time role, let's do this." And that was at the end of May of 23. By July 11th of 2023, I stepped foot on campus as the head of school for the first time, as the full-time head of school. My previous positions have prepared me perfectly for a first-time head position at a much smaller school. I came from 940 students to 110 students, over 500 families to 60 families, and it is awesome being somewhere where you actually know everyone's name and who their siblings are and all of that. So that's where we are today.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so a couple questions about that. So the transition from public to private or to independent schools, what was that like? How did you approach that? What surprised you? What do you think helped you from your previous life, if you will? All those questions. Anything you want to share about that transition?
Sure. So in the late stages of the interview process, my former boss, Leanne, said, "You need to be aware that it's a different world for lots of reasons." And so for me, the transition, because for the previous 5 to 7 years, I was often the one who got to deal with angry parents. I had really refined my skill of parents feeling heard, parents understanding perspective, all of which served me well when I moved into a role where I'm talking about curriculum and why we do this and not that, or why certain changes were being made, why we designed an entire our capital campaign that I came in on was a $65 million capital campaign where we built a new 4-story middle school, a new administration building, and an underground parking garage. But it was all the kid parts of all of it were centered around how kids learn. And so that was an education for parents. But I think for me, the easy transition was when I realized whether you have the parent who donated $10 million or the parent who just paid their taxes to send the kid to school, they love their kids the same. They have same high expectations for their kids. And at the end of the day, that's where the parents are coming from, which reminds me of Rob Evans, the book Hopes and Fears. Hopes and Fears. And so to me, that was huge. And I 100% believe in what they wrote about, him and Michael Thompson, what they wrote about in that book. And so coming to a school here at Galloway, which had zero prior private school leadership. It always just worked out where they hired people from public school to come lead this private school. And so it was led very much like you'd lead a building, not an organization. And so I used that book in my first year talking to the board about parent perspective and where they're coming from. I used it with our teachers. And because this school was a blank slate when it came to private school leadership, people really were yearning for that kind of information. And so the transition to a school with a much smaller budget, I would say, is more than outweighed by the fact that there's a group here and a board who just wants to learn, wants to be led in a way that a faith-based private school should be led.
Yeah, can you talk more about moving to a new school that's very different in size, very different in budget, how you approached that and what that's looked like in practice?
Sure. So in my previous position as the head of school over academics, I often talk about my professional development budget for that, approached $250,000 or more most years. And when I talked with my business manager here, she couldn't even grasp like that number, much less the overall budget and what we were dealing with. I think because at the end of the day, you know, I'm in education, my wife's in education, we're not getting rich. We understand budget. We understand you can't spend more than you make. Coming to a smaller school, and it was a concern during the interview process. The board said, we're not looking for a Rob's South. We're not looking for you to try to do all the huge things that your previous school could do. You kind of have to understand Galloway. So my first year last year, I said, if you're expecting change, big change in year one, don't hire me. I want to understand what the Galloway way is. I want to see how we do things, and then we can start to make changes. And so year one was really about a lot of listening. I met with every single teacher with their own hopes and dreams meetings, and I've continued that into year two. I met with all the board members that wanted to have one-on-one hopes and dreams meetings, and I opened it up to all parents. And so I spent a lot of time in year one listening. But when it came to the budget, I just worked closely with my business manager, who at the time only worked 1 day a week because she had another full-time job. And she felt like, again, because it was just being led, the building was being led sort of just as a building, that she could do the job 1 day a week. As she got to know me and my leadership and the hopes and dreams I had for Galloway, she got the bug. And around spring break of last year, she quit her full-time job to become full-time here and help lead the finance and operations piece of what we're trying to do. But almost every day we would talk budget and what can we afford, what can we not, why is it important to maybe pay more for something because in the long run that's what's going to be best for the school versus always going a different direction. One simple example from last year was it was the Christmas program, where all the parents are going to come, and our programs were printed in black and white. It was a beautiful program, but it was printed in black and white. And I asked, why why are we not printing a program for something this school-wide in color? And was told, well, because in the past we had to get everything approved to print in color. And it's like, I don't know if they said like 17 cents a page or something. And I'm like, okay, so we're going to print 75 of these. Like, why not? I mean, parents are paying 15,000 a year. They should get a color copy when they come to their kids program. But so it's been a transition, and part of all of that was people realizing when I said, "You're professionals. I want you to do your job and do it well." They don't have to come for me for every single thing and get approval because that's what they were used to. And so it's been a transition, but it's been an amazing one.
I want to go back to when you were first appointed. If I heard or understood correctly, it sounds like there was a pretty small amount of time, a pretty short amount of time between the appointment and when you officially assumed your new role as head in 2023. How did you prepare yourself during that time, or did you feel like you were already prepared? Did you have time to prepare? Interested in how you approached that.
So I saw the posting come up and I knew the lead of the search. I had met her previously. She had been with ISAS, and I called her and kind of said, "Hey, Rhonda, this looks like it's got some potential. I'd love to get in on it if it could be for the permanent position." And she said, "Well, the last head gave notice short while ago. They're not sure they're ready, but I'll check." And so she came back within a couple days and said, "The board would like to do an initial interview, and then they'll figure out if you're worth sort of keeping going in the process as a full-time or if they want to go interim." Like I said earlier, by that time, I had been a finalist for a couple really big schools here in Houston for head of school. And so I had gone through some, 2-day on-campus interview processes at multiple schools. And so I felt like surely I can handle whatever process this is going to be. The school year was almost over. I didn't have a lot of commitments that were time sensitive in the month of June. So I had the flexibility. And actually, we went back and forth. I interviewed with the board. They agreed to continue. I interviewed with the faculty and staff. That went really well. Interviewed with some parents, but very low key. It wasn't stressful. And then about a week or two later, I went on my family vacation because we always, every summer, when my previous position, we closed for 2 weeks. First 2 weeks in July, we closed. So that's when I went on vacation. So I went on my family vacation, and while there, the board reached out and said they would like me to be full-time head of school. And so on July 11th, I got up at, I think, 4 a.m. in Minnesota, and we drove an hour to the airport, got on a plane, flew home to Texas, drove an hour home from the airport, jumped in the shower, got out of the shower, and came to school for my finance committee meeting that night. And it really, there was no time to overthink things, it just was interview, vacation, job starts, and away we go.
That's wild. Well, curious about, what the biggest change was when you started. I know maybe it's the difference in size, different in budget. We talked about that. We've done some research at NAIS around, what is often the biggest change for incoming heads, and frequently governance and working with a board, handling finance and overseeing the budget, and adjusting to a new school culture come up as kind of the top three. Wondering if any of those three resonate for you, or maybe it was something else.
No, no, actually all three. So when it came to finance, Paul Mayhew at River Oaks Baptist School is the associate of school for operations. And I think Paul is probably the best in the business. He's phenomenal. And what I love about him was he would include the entire admin team throughout the whole budget process. And so I always knew why certain departments wanted certain things or had certain things and where money was being spent. And so for 6 years, I always had a really good grasp on the budget, and was a part of a lot of the tough conversations because a lot of things schools do relate to education, which directly fell under my role. So budget wise, I felt really prepared, and actually was that the adjustment was my Lori Burke, she didn't keep things as specific as I was used to. Like there might have been a professional development bucket for the budget, but it wasn't broken out by grade levels or departments or anything. It was just, here's your bucket. So I would say, where are we on this spending? And she'd be like, well, we got this much left in the bucket. Like, and so that's something we've been working on, where there are areas where maybe I feel I want more specificity. Lori's working on that. So we're in sync there. When you talk about governance, the board before me no one had ever had any training on how to be a private school board. Now, many of them are on boards in other areas. And so they were sort of running it maybe similarly to just a business. And governance was brought up very early, because in my last position, we went through a governance audit, and there were things that we needed to improve. And I came here, and we didn't even have a governance committee, didn't have an executive committee. We had one or two committees that aren't board committees, but the board didn't know that they weren't board committees. And early on, it was, oh, we don't need a governance committee. We're small enough. We'll be fine. I start bringing in some trainers, start educating the board. And I'm happy to say we have a governance committee now. We have an executive committee now. They have charters. We're working on our onboarding process, because that's been a little different for new board members. But they're drinking the Kool-Aid and realizing we do need to do certain things. And we rely a lot on NAIS. I just bought the new finance 22-page booklet, and we're going to use that as a training piece with our board. So I'm excited about that. But then I think the third thing you touched on, being one who values relationships. From my impression, the school had not been led like that previously. Relationships maybe weren't at the top, but it's what the community wanted. So it was a perfect match for what I believe in, and a community that wanted it. And in year one, that was probably the top thing I would hear from people about the change. They're like, well, it's becoming like the old Galloway, where it's welcome and it's warm and you walk in. And they were like, I was surprised that early on the head of school knew my kid's name, or that my kid walks down a hallway and teachers who he hasn't even had yet know his name. And so to me, that was probably the easiest part of the transition, was the community wanted what I believed in from a culture standpoint.
I want to drill down a little bit more into the governance piece, because I know that that's helpful for a lot of leaders listening. Can you talk more about how you approach partnering with your board, and specifically your board chair, what a successful partnership looks like and what that enables you to do?
So in year one, I would say the board chair, in the interview process, the board chair appeared to be one of my biggest proponents. Like, he seemed to really connect. We seemed to really connect. But as we got into the school year, it was his last year, but his kids were already all gone. And he's a highly successful physician here in the area. And I rarely saw him. And I was used in my experience, I was used to the head of school meeting with the board chair every month at some point right before board meetings, going out to lunch, to catch up, just sort of having that person. And so in year two, when Evan became the board chair and Summer became the vice chair, I said to them early on, I said, I'm not asking for in-depth meetings every month, but I would like touch points, so that either I can find out if there's anything you need, you can find out if there's anything I need, how things are going. And so this year, the three of us will meet almost every month, lunch, discussion, just really building that relationship. And so I have found that, again, relationships solve a lot. Now, when we're in board meetings, those two know exactly what I'm going to say before I say it, and sometimes can sort of help that conversation, because we're all on the same page. Summer is the one who really started diving into the NAIS website and realizing, okay, good governance allows you to be a much better board and a much more successful school we do need this. And so she's really been championing it, which I really appreciate. And we realize that we're currently have 7 board members, but one of them is their family is moving. And then our another board member who's the only non-parent on the board was friends with that family, and in conjunction with getting a new job no longer has the time. So we're now going to be a 5-member board until we can replace. But luckily, Summer, with her governance work, has already been working on that a formal process, because in the past it was just like, well, who do we want to get? And someone would bring up a name, be a little discussion. Maybe they would meet with the person as a group and then be like, all right, we good? and and it was, at any point in the school year. So luckily, we're going to be all right. We've got some people identified. We've got a process we're working on. So I've been fortunate, and I think a bonus. We've had some capital projects these 2 years, and Evan, who's the current board chair, that's his field of expertise. So I can lean on him and say, Evan, is what they're saying, like, is that correct? Do we need to do this or that or whatever? And so I love the relationship we have this year. And I think it's helped the board see that non-parents on the board, while we want some outside perspective, maybe as board president or board chair, that's not that's not the best role when you no longer have kids here.
Right. I wanted to ask about working with parents too. How do you feel like that has shifted being at a new school, new culture, and then going from associate head to head?
So as the associate head, pretty much if I was talking to parent, if I was in a parent meeting, it was because they had a question or a concern. It wasn't just, hey, I want to talk to Dr. Herauf. So I went from conversations where it was giving people feedback or giving them, perspective or whatever, to coming here as the head. Everyone wants a little piece. And so it is still conversations with, well, Dr. Herauf, what about this? Or are we going to have a middle school or this or that? But it's also the conversations where some parents just need a few minutes to be heard, and they know that I'm the head of the school, so let's go right to him. I am known finally. It took a while. If my door's open, it actually means you can come in. I said, if my door's open, even if I'm on the phone, you can come in, because I'm an open door guy. If it's closed, you don't need to knock. I'm not answering because I've closed my door. And so I still, my maintenance guy will still knock. He's like, Dr. Herauf, it's the polite thing to do. I'm going to knock as long as I work here. And I'm like, okay, Luis, you can knock. So if it's a knock, I know it's him. But I'm working with a leadership coach, and he has sort of helped me to maybe put into words. And it reminded me of what you were asking, small school syndrome. Like, everyone wants a piece, and they're just in line waiting. And so someone who might have an issue is going to cut in line. But once that person has their time with you, the next person's going to step up, and that person's going to go to the back of the line. And it's just never ending, because you don't have a lot of hierarchy for someone to get through, or a lot of people who have very specific jobs. You have 4 administrators who are running an entire school. I shared with my team, and I do it periodically when they're kind of, I wouldn't say frustrated, but maybe they're a little bit of burnout because they do have multiple roles. And I have to come in and praise them in an authentic way and say, we're a school with 4 administrators who have the same responsibilities as my last school with 12. We got to get the same stuff done, but there's only 4 of us. And we'll do it together, and we'll get through it, and we'll do it well. And so for my own people here, I think I've put more on their plates, but they also realize it's because it has to be done. Like, leading a private school is different than just leading or managing a school.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask about that too. How do you approach and how do you encourage your team to approach, prioritization and bandwidth? Do you have opportunities with the small school syndrome to step away, to decompress? What does that look like?
So In my past, I've had multiple leaders who always were like, oh, we need work-life balance and family first and all of that, but they maybe didn't model it, right? And so from the beginning, I've said, I've got an 8-year-old. Well, at the time she was 6. I've got a girl who plays volleyball on a national competitive team, and I've got a son now in college. There will be things that I need to go to, just like the 3rd grade teacher whose daughter is in a nationally competitive cheerleading team. You need to go to those competitions. Get your lesson plans done, get a sub, but do it. The other thing was we didn't have any subs when I got here. People just tended to try to cover for each other. And so then I said, okay, so you're covering for that person. Who's doing your job? Well, sometimes I'll get her to do my job. Okay, well, who's doing her job? Okay. And ultimately, they've realized then that means we're still not getting stuff done. So we've built up a great sub pool. And if people are sick or their kid's sick, I'm like, take the time, do what you got to do. I have a sort of a policy where if you need to do something but can get here less than 1 hour late, or you can leave less than 1 hour early, do that. Take care of that. Make that happen. If it's more than that, well, then you're going to have to take a half day and then go get yourself a coffee, and don't worry about, okay, I'm done. I have an hour. Maybe I should go to school. No, take care of yourself. And so that's been the thing. And my board sees it and agrees with it, but the employees really appreciate, just like the other day, we were talking with Lori, my business manager, and I were talking with employees about their salary for next year. And she got a call that something was going on at the house. She needed to get there. And she started trying to reschedule that thing. And I said, well, why? I can talk to the couple employees it'll take while you're gone. Take care of yours so you're not stressed about it. And so I just try to do that whenever possible. The other thing is, and I owe it to Patrick Lencioni's book, Death by Meeting, I don't have meetings if I don't have to have meetings. Yes, yesterday we had a faculty meeting on the books. And on Monday, I'm looking and I'm like, I don't have enough to hold people to a faculty meeting. There's not enough information that I couldn't be in an email or whatever. And so normally our employees, the work day ends at 4:00. On a day like Wednesday, I said, get out of here at 3:30. Enjoy that half an hour. Don't worry about being here. And with that, a lot of our employees do after school clubs, but they could never be on Wednesdays in case of a faculty meeting. So literally everyone could leave a half an hour early to do what they need to do. Things like that.
I love the reference of death by meetings and how you've applied that in practice. Anything else that you've read or seen or listened to that you feel has really helped you in your growth as a leader?
So I mentioned Phil Boyd earlier in People First Leadership. I did some work with him at River Oaks Baptist School in his book, School Culture by Design. And last spring for our gala, he was a gala auction item, and we got the funding to bring him to our school on the first day of in-service this last August. He charges $8,000 a day, and he's a big deal, but he came, and my faculty were like blown away that we took the time to do this for them. And they were like, I mean, some were in tears by the end of the day. Absolutely amazing. But the other thing I always talk about is a few years ago, I was given the book Live in Grace, Walk in Love by Bob Goff. And I read it. I loved it. And I noticed at the back of the book, he has his phone number. And he's like, call me anytime. A few years ago, I called and he answered. I had a 5 or 10 minute conversation with him about a chapel I was working on, and I needed some inspiration. And we talked, and I honestly felt like he would have kept talking, but I was still so in shock that the man answered his phone that I found a reason to hang up. But that's why, and maybe it goes to sort of the community here, everyone has my cell phone number. Every parent that wants it, every teacher, everyone. You need me, call me. It's a great thing about caller ID. If I'm in the middle of something, I won't answer, but if I'm not, I will. And I had a parent call me last night about 7:00, and they kept apologizing for calling. And I'm like, the fact that you needed to call me means you don't need to apologize. Like, this is important time. So I've read everything by Bob Goff. I've done his online speaking series. He's been big. I've read all of Lencioni's books. I'm a big John Maxwell fan. My wife keeps asking, like, why are all my books education leadership or devotionals. And I'm like, well, because there's where I get my inspiration. So
Any pieces of advice that you've received that has been really helpful, or any pieces of advice, maybe it's the same answer, maybe it's not, that you would want to share with any new heads or aspiring heads that are listening right now?
So I would say for an aspiring head, even though my boss told me 100 times, wait for the right position. When the right position becomes available and is sort of meant for you, that's the one to really pour your heart into. Looking back, I would not have been a fit for the Catholic Montessori school that I applied to. That's just it's not my forte. It's just not. So obviously, new heads, you got to find that right fit, and it's going to take a while because chances are I'm not the only one who hears we're waiting. We're going to hire someone with experience. The one thing that I was told, again, for an aspiring head, you may have to take a job that you feel is beneath what you feel you deserve as a head. When I took this job, I was at that point where I was like, I just need experience. And so I took a job for basically no raise. I went from being an associate head to a head, basically a lateral monetary move, but it's getting me the experience I need. And I found that I love it here. And so you got to give things a chance. Something I was sharing with an aspiring leader within our building was when it comes to feedback, whether it be from a parent or your boss or colleague, take it in. There's no need to get defensive. There's no need to sort of immediately in that moment talk about, well, what you would do or rather do or are doing. Take it in, thank the person, acknowledge what they've said, and then at least sleep on it. Guarantee there will be a thread of something you could improve from that feedback if you just let it marinate a bit. And then I guess finally, it's probably the most common sense thing, or at least readily available piece of information. Don't go into a situation intending with a lot of preconceived changes. There are things that early on I might have thought, oh, we need to change, until I realized that no, that's the perfect way to do that in this environment. Especially the longer you're somewhere and you sort of get in your head, this is the way you do things. You go somewhere new and you realize, oh, it can be done a different way. So live through that experience. I really gave myself all year. I tweaked some things, but more often than not, I said, how did we do it last year? Okay, let me experience it. And then afterwards, I would reflect on it for a week or so. I'd take some notes. And so then here in year two, when it came about, I was like, here's some things I need we could do better. And slowly but surely we're making those changes.
Where do you turn to for inspiration? It sounds like what you're reading would definitely be one answer. Any other sources of inspiration for you in your work?
I would say maybe a slightly corny answer is the classroom. Going down to our 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, and they get so excited when a visitor comes in the room, and sometimes it's me just reading a book to a class and then getting the group hug, or going out to recess. A big piece of inspiration this spring was I am teaching an entrepreneurship course to our fifth graders. It's something I did for our middle schoolers in my last job, but I thought, you know what? Our fifth graders are pretty smart. They're pretty creative. And so there's 9 kids and the teacher, and I asked the teacher to be a student as well. And so they've all sort of launched some businesses, and the teacher, Mrs. Anderson, she has a candle business that she has now started. And one of my students, one of our fifth graders, has been selling, he plants plants and then sells them, when they're 2 or 3 inches tall. And he's made almost $1,000 at a farmer's market by his neighborhood as a fifth grader selling plants. And so it really, a lot of the inspiration comes from the kids. And then it comes from the teachers who then come to me and say, Dr. Herauf, when you told me X, Y, and Z, I kind of thought, oh, whatever. But now I see it's happening. Or it's the teacher who tries something new. And so from a day-to-day perspective, I get a lot of inspiration from here. And I also continue to visit schools. I try to get out to 2 or 3 schools a year, see what they're doing, get inspired, make some connections. And that was actually the way I found the leadership coach I'm now working with. I was at a school, really connected with them. That head of school said who his leadership coach was. And And now I have a relationship with one who also gives me some inspiration. So all those sources.
Yeah, that's great. That's really smart that you're visiting schools, and obviously seemed like it paid off specifically in that respect too.
For sure.
So, final question. I started with a big question, so I'll end with a big one too. When you reflect on your career, what do you feel has been your greatest achievement? Of what are you most proud?
Okay. That's a big one. I think what I would say is it may be here at Galloway. I only have about 22 employees, but I can guarantee I have 100% job satisfaction from my employees because they feel free to be professionals and to make decisions and to run their classrooms or to run the curriculum assessment piece or the front office and admissions piece, and they're inspired to do their jobs because they've been told they have the ability to do that. Where in the past, again, it was more, can I send this email? Can I make this change? Can I? And the paralysis of not being able to do your job caused people to question, can I do my job? Am I good at this? And by coming in and allowing people to do their job and to take risks and to say that if we tell students, you learn by making mistakes, I then have to be able to tell my employees, you learn by making mistakes. If they don't make any mistakes, we probably haven't done anything new or updated anything or tried anything. And I don't want to be in an environment like that. So I would probably say that has been the biggest one. And then I still believe in public schools. I worked in some great ones. I would say another accomplishment would just be showing that public school administrators can be good private school administrators.
Hmm. Yes, that's a big one, to be sure. Well, Todd, thank you so much for spending some time with me, and I really enjoyed our conversation. So thanks again.
Thanks, Scott. It's been a highlight of my week for sure.
Thanks for listening to NAIS Member Voices, and thanks again to our sponsor, DSG Storbeck. Again, you can visit dsgco.com to learn more about all the good work they do. This is the last episode of the season, but stay tuned for all new episodes starting next month. You can find some related NAIS resources from this episode by visiting nais.org/member voices. You can also keep an eye on that page for information about past and upcoming episodes. Please be sure to subscribe to Member Voices wherever you get podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. And go back and listen to previous episodes you might have missed. If you have feedback for us, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform to let us know how we're doing. You can also send us your thoughts and suggestions on what you'd like to hear on a future podcast by emailing membership@nais.org.